Hazel Quinn woke to the particular gray hush of an autumn morning in 1903. The light through her curtains still more night than day, and lay a moment listening to the town settle itself awake around her the way it did every morning. A door somewhere down the street, a cartwheel finding the ruts in the road, the church bell not yet ready to mark the hour. She dressed quickly in the cold, pinned her hair back with the quick, practiced hands of a woman who had done the same motion several thousand mornings running, and went down the narrow stair to the shop that occupied the whole ground floor of the building she had rented 4 years before, back when a woman opening her own millinery shop had still raised an eyebrow or two along Main Street, eyebrows that had long since settled into simple acceptance the way this town settled into most things that kept quietly proving their worth. The shop held its own particular morning light, softer and warmer than her friend June's photography studio 2 doors down, because a hat shop wanted a kinder light than a camera did, not the flat, honest north light for judging a likeness, but the gentler, slanting light that let a woman see how a trimmed brim would sit against her own face, how a ribbon would catch and shift as she turned her head before a looking glass. Hazel opened the shutters, dusted the display stands, and took stock of the morning's work waiting for her. 3 hats promised for the week, a 4th begun but not finished, a whole shelf of notions to be tidied after yesterday's business, and behind the counter, in careful rows, the raw materials of her whole trade, bolts of ribbon in every color a reasonable woman could want, ostrich plumes and pheasant feathers ordered special from the city, felt and straw bodies waiting to be blocked into shape, a drawer of buttons and buckles and hat pins sorted by size with the particular fussy precision only a milliner ever truly appreciated. She lit the small stove in the corner more for the glue pot than for herself, because trimming a hat properly wanted warm hands and warm materials both. And by the time the shop bell rang for her first customer of the day, the whole room had taken on the good working warmth she'd come to think of as the shop's true opening hour, whatever the clock itself might claim. Mrs. Abigail Renfrew came first, as she generally did on a Tuesday, wanting a hat for her daughter's wedding the following month, and Hazel had learned over 4 years exactly how to manage a mother in the particular state of anxious hopefulness that a daughter's wedding produced in even the steadiest women. Something that won't outshine the bride, Mrs. Renfrew said, turning before the long glass, but won't disappear beside her either. I've thought of little else all week. You've thought correctly then, because that's exactly the trick of it. Hazel brought out 3 possibilities in quick succession. A soft gray felt with a modest curl of ribbon, a wider straw brim that read as too youthful the moment Mrs. Renfrew tried it, and finally a deep blue velvet toque with a single elegant plume that Hazel had, if she were honest with herself, been quietly hoping the woman would choose since she first laid eyes on her that morning. This one. Mrs. Renfrew turned before the glass a long moment, tilting her head this way and that, and Hazel watched the particular transformation that happened perhaps once in every 4 or 5 fittings, when a customer stopped seeing a hat and started seeing herself in it. "Oh," Mrs. Renfrew said quietly, to her own reflection. "Oh, that's the one." "I generally know within the first 3, Hazel said, and did not say because it would have sounded like boasting that she had known within the first one. The late morning brought a very different sort of customer, a girl of perhaps 16 named Ida Kessler, brought in by her mother, for what both of them plainly understood to be a small ceremony in its own right. Her first properly grown-up hat, the kind a young woman wore once she had left the plain schoolgirl bonnets behind for good. Ida stood very straight and very solemn before the glass while Hazel set a simple, becoming straw hat upon her head, adjusted the angle a careful half-inch, and stepped back. The girl's whole face changed, not dramatically. She was too well brought up for that, standing in her mother's presence. But something settled and lifted in her at once, the particular expression of a girl catching her first honest glimpse of the woman she was going to become, still years off but now, suddenly, visible. "Well," her mother said, a little thick in the throat, watching her daughter watch herself. "Well, there she is." Hazel had seen this particular moment perhaps 30 times across 4 years of business, and it had never once, not a single time, stopped catching at something in her own chest to watch it happen. One more customer came before noon, a woman Hazel had not seen before, dressed well but plainly, who introduced herself as Mrs. Cordelia Ashe, recently arrived to take up the position of postmistress 2 towns over, in need of something suitable for the position. Dignified, she said, but not severe, because she intended to hold that post a good long while and did not care to dress like a woman twice her age, simply to be taken seriously by it. Hazel understood the request better than most, having watched more than one young woman in this town navigate the particular narrow path between being taken seriously and being made to feel she'd forfeited something by being taken seriously at all. And she brought out a small dark green hat with a modest brim and the barest touch of trim at the band, nothing that would catch a customer's eye before it caught the woman's own competence. "That's it," Mrs. Ashe said, trying it before the glass, turning her head to see how it sat. "That's exactly the thing. Sensible, but not—" She paused, searching for the word. "Not asking anyone's permission to be sensible," Hazel offered. "Yes, precisely that." Mrs. Ashe laughed and paid for it without further deliberation, and left with the particular brisk satisfaction of a woman who had found exactly what she hadn't quite known how to ask for. She took her dinner at the small table behind the counter, standing between customers the way she generally did on a Tuesday, and used the quieter early afternoon hour to return to the hat she'd left half-finished the day before. A deep green felt, blocked and shaped, wanting only its trim now to be complete. This was the part of the trade Hazel loved best, and would have found nearly impossible to explain to anyone who had never sat with a needle and a length of grosgrain in their own hands. She worked slowly, testing one arrangement of ribbon and feather against the felt, and then unpicking it and trying another, because a hat's trim was not decoration exactly, not the way a stranger might assume. It was closer to argument. Each ribbon and pin a small proposal the hat either accepted or quietly refused, until the whole arrangement resolved itself into the one correct answer that had, Hazel privately believed, been waiting inside that particular felt all along for someone patient enough to find it. She had learned the blocking of a felt body years before, under a milliner in the city, who'd taken her on as a girl of 17 with more patience than talent, steaming the felt soft over the kettle until it would yield to the wooden block beneath her hands, easing it down over the crown, working the brim to its proper curve with a patience that had taken her the better part of 2 years to develop, and had never, in the 15 years since, once felt like anything but a small private pleasure to practice. The trimming was a different discipline entirely, less about strength and more about restraint, knowing when a hat had received enough and needed no more, a lesson that had taken her rather longer to learn than the blocking had, and one she still occasionally had to remind herself of when a particularly fine length of ribbon tempted her toward one flourish too many. She caught it a little after 2. The ribbon swept back at precisely the angle that made the whole hat suddenly look inevitable rather than merely pretty, and sat back a moment, simply looking at her own finished work with the particular satisfaction that never once, in 4 years, had worn the least bit thin. Hazel had opened this shop with money she'd saved across 7 years of working under other women's roofs and other women's names on the shop signs, and she still remembered, with a clarity that surprised her sometimes, the particular mixture of nerves and stubbornness she'd felt hanging her own sign for the first time. Hazel Quinn, Milliner, painted in gold on the window glass by a sign painter she'd paid with nearly the last of her savings, because she'd decided, somewhere in her 6th year of apprenticeship, that she would rather fail plainly under her own name than succeed quietly under someone else's for the rest of her working life. 4 years on, the shop had not made her rich, and had never once come close to failing either, and she had come to understand that this middle distance, steady, respectable, entirely her own, was worth a good deal more to her than either of the 2 more dramatic outcomes she'd once lain awake imagining. The afternoon brought its own small parade, a farmer's wife in for ribbon and thread, no hat today, but good unhurried conversation about the harvest while Hazel measured out 3 yards of blue grosgrain, a traveling drummer trying without much hope to interest her in a line of imported feathers she had no need of and firmly declined, and near 4 o'clock a young woman named Sarah Pruitt, who worked at the mill and had been coming in every few weeks all summer to look, carefully and without buying, at a particular wine-colored velvet hat in the window, saving toward it in installments so small Hazel had stopped sometime in July, mentioning the running total out loud. $2 today, Sarah said, setting the coins on the counter with the particular care of someone handling money that had cost her something real to earn. That puts you at $11 even, Hazel said, though she had, in fact, known the sum before Sarah spoke, having kept it faithfully in her own ledger since the girl's first modest deposit back in June. $4 more, and she's yours. Sarah looked at the hat in the window, the way she looked at it every visit, unhurried, entirely patient, a woman saving for a thing she wanted with her own money and her own 2 hands. And Hazel found herself, not for the first time, quietly resolving that, whatever the final total came to, she intended to find some small reason to knock $1 off it before the girl reached the end. By 5, the light through the shop's front window had gone the particular gold color that meant the working day was nearly spent, and Hazel's last customer of the afternoon left with a small parcel of hatpins and a promise to return Thursday for a fitting, and the shop settled into the quiet that closed every one of Hazel's days. She swept the floor, tidied the ribbon spools back into their proper rows, wrote the day's modest but respectable takings into her ledger, and carried Mrs. Renfrew's finished blue velvet toque to the back room to be boxed and readied for Thursday's collection, setting it beside the green felt she'd finished that afternoon, 2 small completed arguments resolved and waiting. Upstairs, Her own rooms held the good quiet of an evening properly earned, and she sat a while at her small table with a cup of tea, working because a milliner's hands rarely sat entirely idle, even at rest, on a length of trim for a hat of her own, plain gray wool she'd been meaning to finish since the weather turned, more out of habit than any real need, since her own wardrobe had never once in 4 years received the same careful attention she gave every customer who walked through her door. She thought, stitching by lamplight, of Mrs. Renfrew's daughter's wedding hat, and whether the blue would photograph well. She'd have to ask June about that next door. And of Ida Kessler's face in the glass, and of Sarah Pruitt's 11 careful dollars, and found, as she generally found at this hour, a settled private satisfaction in the accounting of it, not the ledger's numbers, but the day's other tally, the one she never wrote down anywhere at all. She banked her small stove, blew out the lamp, and lay a while in the dark before sleep properly claimed her, her body carrying the day the plain, honest way it always did, her fingers faintly sore from an afternoon of pins and needlework, the good tiredness of hands that had made something worth making. She thought, without any urgency, of Thursday's fitting, and of the gray wool trim still wanting an hour more work, and of whether Sarah Pruitt might come again before the week was out with another 2 careful dollars. It arranged itself in the proper order somewhere behind her closing eyes, and asked nothing further of her. Below her, in the dark shop, the shelves stood full and orderly, ribbon and felt and feather, waiting patient for morning, 2 finished hats boxed and ready in the back room, and the wine-colored velvet still sitting in the window where it had sat all summer waiting for $4 more, and a girl who had never once missed a single installment. Hazel Quinn's eyes closed, and the whole quiet shop settled into the dark around her, and she slept.